June 7, 1944. Early light crept through the smoke still hanging over the Norman hedgerows, as Sergeant Bill Morrison of the 29th Infantry Division crouched behind a low stone wall, watching shapes move through the pale morning mist about 200 yards to the east. For a split second, his finger tightened on the trigger of his M1. Then he noticed the helmets, different shape, flatter rim, and uniforms in a slightly different shade of olive. British soldiers, moving inland from Gold Beach, pushing toward the American sector. Morrison had never actually seen a British soldier before. None of the men in his squad had. They had trained in England for months, sure, but always on American bases, always among American units. Now, barely 36 hours after hitting Omaha Beach, still exhausted, still shaken from the landing, they were finally meeting their allies face to face. "Hold your fire," Morrison whispered. "They're ours. Well, theirs. You know what I mean? The British." Patrol drew closer. Morrison stood and raised his hand. The lead British soldier, a lieutenant judging by his insignia, halted, studied Morrison's group, then stepped forward with his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. He looked young, maybe 23, with a thin mustache and a carefully neutral expression. "29th Infantry?" the British officer asked. His accent clipped the words, formal and precise. "That's right," Morrison replied. "You're from Gold Beach, 50th Division? We were supposed to link up around Port-en-Bessin?" The British officer glanced toward the column of smoke rising inland from Omaha Beach. "Bit rough yesterday," he said calmly. Morrison thought of the beach, the bodies in the surf, the screaming, the 6 hours of chaos before they finally clawed their way off the sand. "Yeah?" Morrison said quietly. "Rough?" The British lieutenant nodded once, as if Morrison had merely confirmed something he already knew. "Right then, we're moving toward Bayou. Your command aware we're operating here?" "They are now," Morrison said. The lieutenant allowed a faint smile, not quite friendly, not quite distant. "Good show. Carry on." He turned, murmured something Morrison couldn't hear, and the patrol moved west. Morrison watched them disappear into the hedgerows. Corporal Eddie Hayes, a Brooklyn native, stepped up beside him. "So that's the British," Hayes said. "What were you expecting?" "I don't know," Morrison replied. "More British, I guess. They look like us." "Different helmets," Morrison said. "Different uniforms. Did you see their rifles?" "Lee Enfields," Hayes nodded. "My dad carried one in the last war. Says they're solid guns. Fast shooter, slow bolt." Morrison watched the British patrol advance through the hedges, each man covering the next, spacing perfect, movement deliberate and controlled. They look like they know exactly what they're doing. "So do we," Hayes said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. Morrison didn't answer. His mind was still on Omaha Beach, on the confusion and panic and desperate rush forward. The British moved as if this were routine, almost ceremonial. Not better, not worse, just different. By mid-morning, Morrison's platoon had pushed 2 miles inland and encountered British forces 3 more times. Each meeting followed the same pattern: cautious identification, brief exchanges, then onward movement. The British were polite, efficient, and strangely unaffected by the war erupting around them. It was beginning to unsettle the Americans. Private First Class Tommy Chen, a radio operator from San Francisco, finally put it into words while they paused in a farmyard. "They're too calm," Chen muttered, watching a British squad calmly brew tea, inside a shattered barn while German artillery thumped somewhere in the distance. "Don't they realize there's a war going on?" A small stove was set up. Someone produced tea from a tin. Metal cups were passed around, while a British sergeant studied a map. One man smoked a pipe. A pipe? Morrison had seen men smoke cigarettes under fire, sure, but a pipe suggested leisure. Reflection. A Sunday afternoon. Maybe that's just how they are. Morrison said. It's weird, Chen insisted. We're jumping at every noise and they're having a tea break. A stocky British corporal overheard and wandered over, cup in hand. Fancy a brew? He asked, offering Chen the cup. Chen accepted it cautiously, sniffed. This is really tea? Of course it is, the corporal said. What else would it be? I don't know, medicine, fuel. The corporal laughed, a short, sharp bark. You Yanks can't function without coffee, eh? Same thing for us. Tea keeps you steady. He tapped his temple. Settles the nerves. Chen sipped, grimaced. It's hot. That's the idea. Morrison accepted a cup when it was offered. The tea was strong and bitter. Nothing like the sweet iced tea his mother made back home in Virginia. But it was hot. Grounding. The corporal was right. There was something calming about the ritual. The British had been fighting for nearly 5 years now. Maybe this was how you survived that long. How long you been fighting? Morrison asked. Since 1940, the corporal replied. Dunkirk, North Africa, Sicily. Now here. No pride. No complaint. Just facts. You've had 2 days. The corporal studied Morrison's face, then nodded. You'll get used to it, or you won't. Either way, keep your rifle clean and your head down. He finished his tea and returned to his squad. Hayes leaned close. 4 years of war, and he's making tea in a barn. Either they're crazy, or we are. Maybe both, Morrison said. As the day stretched on, the differences became clearer. Morrison's platoon was temporarily attached to a British company for an advance toward a crossroads roughly 2 miles south. The British captain, a tall, narrow-faced man named Peyton, briefed the mixed force in the same tone Morrison remembered, from his high school principal explaining detention rules. Calm, measured, faintly bored. The objective is this crossroads, Peyton said, tapping the map. Jerry has a machine gun position here, possibly a mortar team here. We'll advance in 2 columns, suppress the gun, and clear the position. Questions? Morrison raised his hand. What if they've got more than 1 machine gun? Then we suppress both, Peyton replied, as though the answer were self-evident. The key is maintaining formation and not bunching up. Jerry rather enjoys it when you bunch up. Makes his work easier. Morrison had more questions about flanking fire, reinforcements, artillery, but Peyton had already moved on, issuing instructions to his platoon leaders with the same unhurried precision. The British soldiers listened, nodded, checked weapons. No visible nerves, no excitement, just readiness. Lieutenant Kowalski pulled Morrison aside. What do you think? They've done this before, Morrison said. So have we? Not like this, Morrison replied. Not for 4 years straight. Kowalski frowned. You think we should copy them? Morrison thought it over. The British method was cautious, methodical. The American approach emphasized speed and aggression, hit hard, overwhelm fast. Different schools of thought, different wars fought. I think we should watch, Morrison said finally, and learn. The advance began at noon. The British moved forward in textbook fashion, each section covering the next, using every dip in the ground, every hedge, every fold of terrain. They moved slowly, too slowly, Morrison thought at first. His instincts screamed to sprint across open ground, but the British didn't rush, and soon he understood why. They never exposed themselves unnecessarily. When they met resistance, they stopped, assessed, and brought up support. No blind charges. No wasted lives. When the German machine gun opened fire at 50 yards, the lead British squad dropped instantly, returning fire while the sergeant calmly relayed coordinates. Within half a minute, a mortar team adjusted aim. 3 rounds later, the machine gun fell silent. Advance, Peyton called. They moved again. Same pace, same discipline. Morrison's squad followed, forcing themselves to match the British rhythm. It felt unnatural. Hayes was breathing hard. "This is taking forever," he muttered. "But we're not getting shot," Morrison replied. They reached the crossroads 15 minutes later. The German crew had withdrawn once the mortars found them. The British immediately secured the area. Defensive positions, patrols, perimeter, without celebration or relief. Just the next task. Peyton approached Morrison. "Your men handled themselves well. Good fire discipline." "We followed your lead," Morrison admitted. "Sensible," Peyton said. "You'll develop your own style eventually." "Everyone does." He pulled out a silver cigarette case and offered one. "The trick is surviving long enough to find that style." Morrison accepted the cigarette. "Is it always this controlled?" "Hardly," Peyton replied, lighting both cigarettes. "Sometimes it's pure chaos. But structure gives the men something to cling to." He checked his pocket watch. "We'll hold here until dark, then push another mile. Your officers can coordinate with my second in command. Get your men fed and rested." Morrison saluted. The British return salute was casual, almost a wave. Nearby, Hayes examined a British ration tin. "It's got tea," he announced. "The ration has tea." "Of course it does," Chen said. "Probably crumpets, too." "What's a crumpet?" "No idea. Something British." Morrison sat, opening his own rations. Nearby, British soldiers ate quietly, trading dry remarks Morrison barely understood. One man read a book while eating. A British private noticed Morrison staring. "Fancy a swap?" he asked. "My tinned beef for your—" "What's that?" "Spam." "Spam," the private repeated thoughtfully. "What is it?" "Mystery meat." "Ah, same as ours." He sat beside Morrison uninvited, lit a cigarette. "You lot did well today? First time fighting with us?" "First time meeting you," Morrison said. "We trained in England, but never together." The private frowned. "That's mad. Allies kept apart. Maybe they thought we'd fight each other. Are we that different?" Morrison considered. "Yes, but not badly." "Well then," the private said, standing. "That'll do. Name's Reg Cooper, Sheffield. Bill Morrison, Virginia. Tobacco country, eh?" "Try not to get shot, Bill. Be ashamed to lose a new mate." He wandered off, leaving Morrison unsure whether they were friends or if it was just British humor. "They're strange," Chen muttered. "But decent," Hayes added. Morrison nodded. "Different, but worth respecting." As night approached, Morrison's platoon was positioned beside a British platoon in a hedgerow overlooking a shallow valley. The British immediately set to work, deepening positions, improving cover, laying out clear fields of fire. The Americans, drained from 2 days of non-stop combat, mostly slumped where they stood. After dark, the British platoon sergeant, a stocky Welshman named Davies, whose accent Morrison struggled to follow, walked over to Lieutenant Kowalski. "Your lads look absolutely knackered," Davies said. "We are," Kowalski admitted. "Whatever that means." "Dead tired," Davies explained. "When did they last get proper sleep?" "Before we got on the boats." Davies let out a low whistle. "Right then. My men will take first watch. Yours sleep till midnight, then we swap." Kowalski hesitated. "That's a lot of duty for your boys." "They'll manage," Davies replied. "You won't if you're falling asleep with a rifle in your hands." Morrison felt uneasy about it, but exhaustion won. He curled up against the hedge and was asleep in minutes. A hand shook his shoulder. Midnight. Your watch. It was Reg Cooper, crouched beside him. "Anything happen?" Morrison asked groggily. "Quiet as a church," Reg said. "Jerry's probably just as worn. Out." He handed Morrison a canteen. Tea. Still warmish. Morrison drank. This time it was sweet, mixed with condensed milk. It cleared his head instantly. "Thanks." "No trouble. Your mate Hayes is over there. We've got the left covered." Reg paused, then smirked. "And Morrison, your snoring could wake the dead." During his watch, Morrison studied the British positions. Even at night, even with men sleeping. Discipline never slipped. Sentries shifted regularly. Whispered signals passed along the line. When Davies made rounds, he spoke quietly to each man, checking nerves as much as alertness. It wasn't just training, it was habit, hard-earned experience. Dawn arrived cold and gray. The British were already awake, brewing tea, cleaning rifles, preparing for the day. The Americans stirred slowly, stiff and sore. Tea first, always tea first, then weapons, then breakfast, then gear check. Routine keeps you sane, Davies explained. Don't you ever want to sleep in? Chen asked. Sleep in and get killed, Davies replied cheerfully. Jerry loves dawn attacks. So we're always ready, ruins his plans. Later that morning, Morrison's platoon joined a British company for a farm clearing operation. The briefing was precise, detailed, and complex. Multiple phases, tight timing, careful coordination. This is simple, Captain Ashford said when Kowalski looked overwhelmed. You should see a proper set-piece attack. The Americans were used to simpler plans. Go there, take that, hold it. The advance began at 800. The British assumed every building was occupied. Every hedgerow concealed a gun. Every gate hid a trap. They checked everything. The Americans wanted to rush. Why are we crawling? Hayes whispered. Because they want to be alive at the end, Morrison replied. By the time the farms were secured, they had uncovered 3 German positions that would have slaughtered a faster force. During a pause, Morrison spoke with Lieutenant Thornton, a young British officer who'd escaped. Dunkirk as a private. How do you stay patient? Morrison asked. Thornton smiled. We learned the hard way. In 1940, we tried moving fast. Didn't work. Now we're thorough. Doesn't it drive you mad? Frustration gets you killed, Thornton said. Patience keeps you breathing. By afternoon, 12 German prisoners were taken. No British casualties. That evening, Americans helped the British reinforce a captured position. Lessons were sinking in. Rations were shared. Stories traded. Songs followed. British music hall tunes answered by loud American singing. Reg sat beside Morrison. You Yanks are all right, he said. Bit loud, bit chaotic. And you lot are too calm, Morrison replied. Especially with tea under fire. Tea keeps you human, Reg said. You'll see. As the night deepened, Morrison found himself talking with Sergeant Davies about life before the war. Jobs, families, things left behind. You married? Davies asked. Engaged? Morrison replied. Girl back in Richmond. Davies nodded. Wife and 2 kids, Cardiff. Haven't seen them in 3 years. He produced a worn photograph. Morrison studied the smiling faces. You think this ends soon? Morrison asked. Davies looked toward the dark horizon. We're in France, that's progress. But Jerry's still got teeth. Long way to Berlin. The next morning brought new orders. The British were heading east, the Americans west. The combined force was breaking apart. The 2 platoons gathered to say goodbye. Davies shook Kowalski's hand. Good luck. Keep your head down. Reg approached Morrison and handed him a small paper-wrapped bundle. What's this? Tea? Proper stuff. I don't know how to make it. You'll learn. Drink it when things get ugly. They shook hands. See you in Berlin, Reg said. See you there, Morrison replied. Weeks later, pinned down near Cherbourg, Morrison brewed that tea for his squad. It tasted awful, but it worked. When the war ended in Bavaria, Morrison brewed one last pot. They toasted victory. To the British, Morrison said. To the British, the squad echoed. They drank and laughed. The Americans had learned that allies didn't need to be the same, just reliable. In letters sent home, American soldiers described their British allies with a blend of amusement and respect. They wrote about the tea, always the tea, about the calmness under fire, about discipline that felt almost unnatural to men fresh from Omaha's chaos. Some complained the British were slow, overly cautious, bound by rules. Others admired their professionalism, their experience, their refusal to take pointless risks. Most settled somewhere in between, recognizing that the British way of war was different, but effective. The British, in turn, found Americans aggressive, informal, and sometimes reckless, but they also saw energy, optimism, and a willingness to learn. The two armies were shaped by different histories and different wars, yet they learned quickly how to fight side by side. An American soldier from the 29th Infantry wrote to his sister in July 1944, "The British are strange fellows. They drink tea instead of coffee. They stay calm when they should be scared, and move slow when you expect them to run. But they've been fighting for 5 years, and they're still here. That tells me they must be doing something right. I think we're learning from them." Another officer wrote in his diary, "Linked up with British troops today. Expected stiff, formal men from the movies. Instead found soldiers like us, tired, determined, trying to survive. Different styles, same purpose. The partnership wasn't perfect. There were disagreements over tactics, pace, and command. Friction was inevitable. But shared hardship built respect. The British brought experience, lessons paid for in blood from Dunkirk, the Blitz, North Africa, and Italy. The Americans brought numbers, industry, and aggressive confidence. Together, they formed a force that would push across France, into Germany, and toward victory. Those first meetings in Normandy laid the groundwork. Morrison carried that tin of tea through France, Belgium, and across the Rhine. He never mastered brewing it properly. Too strong, too weak, always wrong, but he kept making it. On May 8, 1945, he brewed one final pot. His squad drank it without complaint. It tasted terrible, but it meant they had survived. Different armies, different habits, same victory.